thank you again. When this church prays, you can feel the prayers. They're palpable and they're present. And like many of you who have been prayed for, I just want to say I cannot thank you enough. My dad is Scottish, which means those moving images of people saying a gentle goodbye and then closing their eyes, and they just pass very quietly. Scottish people never do that. So somewhere now, my dad and the Lord is going to have to figure out a rendezvous point. And not everything in the body gets the memo at the same time. So my dad is somewhere in this final chapter. And your prayers and your support have meant the world to us. And I want to say thank you for that. I am going to include a little bit of that reflection in the sermon today. But I'm going to also say it is inevitable that on this one Sunday of the year, we have more guests and visitors than almost any other Sunday. And I ask the Lord as I look out upon you, how did you know that today is supposed to be the one Sunday of the year that I preach a pledge sermon? For everybody that goes, I go to church all the time and all they talk about is money. It's only one time a year. Unbelievable. But actually, interestingly, today's sermon is not about our pledge drive for this church. I'll do that really simple. We need your support. Everybody with me? Okay, got it. There's our pledge sermon for 2016. The pledge I want to talk about is a little different. I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people, the older I get, the more I like things a certain way before I travel. I don't know how I got this gene, but I like to clean up my desk. I like to have everything kind of washed and put away, and it helps me feel like there's a myth that somehow my life will be more orderly when I come back. And so does anybody here do that? So you get everything all together, and even if it's not organized, at least if you put the papers in order, they look better on the desk. So I was doing my archaeological dig of my desk at the ministry center, and just before I was leaving, I lifted up a folder, and a little slip of paper, I had torn it from the top of a letter like 8 years ago. And it's one of those things I thought, boy, it must be profound. I'm sure I'll get to it at some point. And it had slipped in the back of this folder. And I was just rushing to get ready to leave, and there it is. And it landed right in the middle of the desk. And without thinking, I grabbed it, and I simply put it into my satchel, and I went flying out of the office. After I received those disturbing pictures of Pastor Penguin, I boarded the plane in Denver. And I'm on the plane, and I open my satchel, and I see this torn piece of paper. I open it up on the plane, and I kid you not, it was a letter asking for financial support to a mission that our church supported years ago. And at the top of the letter is a Bible verse. I don't even remember. I'll get it for you. I don't know. I think it's 2nd Chronicles. I don't even know who says this, but at the top of the letter is a quote. I will not give God anything that costs me nothing. It just struck me like a lightning bolt. Maybe David is the one who says it, not sure. I will not give God anything that costs me nothing. I just stared for like an hour and a half at this flight. I stared at that piece of paper. I was going to be at the bedside of my father. He's wrestled. He's a former football player, and 4 years in college back in the day, getting repeated blows to his head, and he has brain atrophy. And there's a one-way ticket on that journey. We're now learning about concussions and football. And so my dad was very close to dying. I didn't tell you that the week before I left. The hospital pulled him through, and so my stepmother said, if you want to come, now's a good time. So I went. Everybody knows what it's like to enter into that hospital world, don't you? It's so different. Time disappears. When the sun comes up, nobody knows inside of those rooms. When the sun goes down, nobody knows inside of the room. The TV's on, it's playing, people come in and out, they're checking off lists, and there's my dad in the bed. We had a protocol, we had to put gloves and a smock on. And I did that for the first couple of days, but since they're young years, I'll tell you that after the first couple of days, I said, in translation, to heck with the protocol, and I took those gloves off. And I sat down next to the bed, and I held my father's hand. And the minute I touched that hand, my dad played center guard and tackle. He's a prodigiously strong, lifetime athlete of a man. He's got very strong hands and very strong arms. The minute I touched that hand, I had a flood of memories about all the gifts that my father had given to me. I remember my dad in the surf. I was born and raised in Florida, so every good Bible story is a beach story from where I was raised. Mountains here, beach back there. But I remember 3, 4 years old, those waves would come in and they could just knock me silly. And I'm flailing and I'm getting tossed about, which is a good sermon in itself, by the waves of the world, and out came that hand. And I will tell you what, there was never one wave anywhere on any beach that could move that man. Once he planted, he stood in the midst of those waves and they went past him. He was that strong. And I remember my dad holding my hand through all of those waves, and I knew that I would be safe. I remember that same hand handing me the keys to what I thought was the greatest gift I had ever or would ever receive in my life. I paid $500 for a 1966 white Plymouth Valiant. Does anybody here know what 3 on the tree means? I had it, and it was glorious. And this white metal missile of death was given to me for $500. And I remember my dad shaking my hand and saying, "Son, this isn't like anything you've ever received before." I remembered as I sat with my dad and held his hand, I remembered the time, and I was a senior in high school. And let's just say, now that we will be on YouTube, that there was one night in my last semester of senior year when I came back home a little later than I had planned, and I wasn't in tip-top shape. Less than ideal condition. And I remember my mom standing at the window of our house, full of what the Bible calls righteous indignation. And my mom was going to unleash righteousness upon me. From the driveway all the way to the front door. Any mother here might know what that looks like. And I remember my father stepping in between me and the wrath of God and holding my hands, because I was just not up to the top of my game, and walking me into the house past my mother and guarding me and getting me into my bedroom and taking my shoes off and helping me get ready to go to bed. And my dad held my hand when I was in that bed, and I remember my dad saying, "Son, you get me tonight, you'll get your mother in the morning." I remember those hands when I, at the age of 15, called my mother a word in a moment of anger as a 15-year-old boy that you should never use to any woman anywhere. And I remember those hands lifting me up very quickly and putting me conveniently on our refrigerator door with magnets at my back. My feet were floating. And I remember those hands holding me tight. I remember my dad having a little visit with me about this far about the fact that I was not the man in the house. And if I ever used that word to my mother or any other woman ever again in my lifetime, he would see to it that the tongue that had said that word would come out of my mouth. And he could certainly make, as Bill Crosby said, 3 more of me anytime he wanted. I've never used that word to anyone ever again. thought about all of these moments when I was holding the hand of my father in that hospital. He can't talk the way that I'm speaking now. But boy, did we have an amazing time. I thought about all the gifts he gave me to have the life that I have now. I started thinking about what a true gift it is to receive life. I thought about, actually, this great story, the widow of Zarephath. And I realized that that's what God always does. Find me a story where God does not save people's lives in the Bible and change their lives forever. God always gives life, always. I mean, the man born blind, right? The woman caught in adultery. Lepers. Healing, the man that was lame and started dancing in front of the temple. Story after story after. This is what God does. And I understand, and I'm sitting here with my dad, trust me, I understand people that die in ways that we don't expect. But even those people have received a gift of life. And I started to think about what a pledge really means. Remember the slip of paper? I will never give God anything that costs me nothing. It's interesting that in the Episcopal Church, we can talk about pledge drives for budgets a lot easier than we can talk about lives. Jesus always spoke to lives. The widow today in the line, Jesus has gone to Jerusalem one time in the Gospel of Mark at the end of his life. He goes to Jerusalem. He takes on the religious authorities. He tells them that all the rituals they're doing, they've forgotten why they're doing them. And he's battling with the religious authorities. And he sits down just to take a break from that conversation. His disciples are all around him. And he's watching these folks come in to give their gift. Now, in the Jewish tradition, I've considered this, but I thought maybe this would be a rough go for Episcopalians. In the Jewish tradition, everybody knows you give your gift, you pay before you pray. It's true to this day that when you go into the Jewish New Year, you pay your pledge before you take your seat. This is a very efficient way to have a pledge drive. Yes, I've considered it, but it's a little awkward for visitors. Hi, welcome to our church. Right at the door, a little challenging for Protestants. But this is how they did it. And so, in the temple in the first century, here come all these people that are going to pray, and they're giving their pledge and then going into the temple. And Jesus is just taking a moment, and he sees something. He says to his disciples, "Look! Did you see that?" And the disciples, usually, just as usual, dumb as posts. The disciples say, "What? The guy there that built all those big homes?" No, Jesus, no, that guy. The family, that beautiful family. No, right there. They can't even see her. The widow. The least noticeable person. Jesus said, "Did you see what she just did?" They say, "No." Jesus says, "She gave more than anybody else in that line." Now, let me be clear. This is not a teaching to give away every single thing that we have. I have never interpreted the widow's mite like that. This is not about money. It's about something else. That early church in Jerusalem did give everything away, and they ended up so poor and unable to function that St. Paul has to go around and collect contributions for them. I don't believe that's what, in most circumstances, what God is calling us to. What Jesus was saying is, that woman came to the temple so that the very last thing she would see in this world, which happened all the time in Jerusalem, was the beautiful sight and sounds of people praying to God. Elderly people in the first century would go to the temple to die. The last choice they could make was a choice about what they were seeing and hearing as they died. That woman brought everything she had. It was a one-way ticket. And she was going to die right there. And Jesus says, that is the gift that God is looking for. It's pledging our lives to God. Giving everything of who we are to God. It's interesting that most people talk about tithes and 10% and all that, and I realize, you go to a meal in Edwards, you'll tip your waiter 20%. That's more than most people give to the Lord. The Bible never says you get 90% and God gets 10. Please don't misunderstand what the Bible's saying. The Bible says God has 100% of you. And what then can we release in gratitude? I will never give anything to the Lord that costs me nothing. I sat there holding my father's hand, and I realized that all of my dad's life was about giving me the gift of life. And if that's true for my father, is it not more true for our Heavenly Father? That Jesus came to give us life. And that the real pledge isn't a yellow card. Our cards are yellow this year. The red ones are the Vail Valley Foundation. The yellow cards, okay? It's not about a pledge card to a church. It's about the pledge that's right here. It's written on the human heart. May I ask you today, where are you pledged? To whom are you pledged? Where have you offered your life to be a gift and a blessing to someone else? Is that in a marriage or a family? Is that at work? Are there some of us sitting here today that have never pledged ourselves to anything? May I suggest that the pledge card that's really important is not the one to our church. It's the one right here in the human heart. That God says, would you pledge yourselves to me? Like that widow did, the very last thing she did. I will die facing the Lord. My dad doesn't have that option. But the widow did. And so did we. So friends, it is a good day to preach about pledging, but perhaps not about money. The pledge of something far more important. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.